Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 23rd, 2021. Time for yet another show, and a Friday show at that. So, where do we go with this? I don't know. Sort of one of those open forum types of shows. But we do have a special guest lined up for today. Interesting. I thought this would make an interesting thing to toss you for discussion on a Friday, particularly at the close of the show. But Aaron Hamlin joining us from the Center for Election Science. I really hadn't seen this one coming, quite honestly, but I got a pitch for this, and I thought, hey, here's something I don't know anything about. The Center for Election Science, actually, and Aaron, here to promote a entirely different voting system, and one I hadn't heard anything about. I had heard about the instant runoff voting and the ranked choice voting. These two, which I guess are either similar or identical. I'm just not up to speed on this. Quite honestly, although I had heard that they had used or debuted the system recently in Maine, and it was a great way of getting rid of their idiot Trumpy governor. And inherently, we understand that it makes a certain amount of sense to allow people to vote their preferences and not split votes. For instance, in places like Vermont, where you have a strong progressive party that occasionally puts up candidates of its own against Democratic candidates on the same ticket, and then of course the Republican Party puts up a candidate. You have a fairly liberal state. Vermont is actually a little bit more conservative than people realize, despite the fact that they've elected Bernie Sanders for quite some time. They sometimes will split their vote between, or run the danger anyway, of splitting their vote between a Democratic candidate and a progressive candidate, and leaving a state that might vote nearly 60% for as between Democrats and progressive candidates, leave them with a minority preference Republican governor instead. And it becomes a problem. And we saw that happen, I think, we've seen it happen in a number of places. And at any rate, after several such incidents, and of course, lots of continuing complaints about, our system tends towards the two parties and nothing much else. And though there are other solutions offered in other states, and New York has, for instance, the fusion voting, things like that, instant runoff and ranked choice voting offered up an opportunity to do things differently and maybe get a better result. But it confused some people, and it is a little bit confusing when they ask you not only to discuss who your top preference is, but then to rank people. And I don't know. I might say I don't know if I can come up with a rational basis for choosing as between number 2 and number 3, or number 3 and number 4. But this is an entirely, I guess not entirely new, but a different style of voting called approval voting, which on the face of it seems to make a great deal more sense. You simply say, the proposition anyway is, here are 800 candidates in a nonpartisan primary / runoff type situation, and just vote for the ones that you like and that you would be happy with winning this election, and you don't have to bother ranking them. And he'll be here to illustrate the differences between the systems, talk about the possibilities for using this new system. And in fact, as it turns out, they have used it in selecting the new mayor of St. Louis, Missouri. So there's some real world experience with it. And of course, what we might call theoretical experience or fake world experience with it that comes from debating it and pushing for it and lobbying for it to be adopted and used in more situations, so people become more used to it, rather than the old style of one choice only voting. So I thought it might be interesting. We'll throw that into our last segment in our second hour, so there's plenty to get to between then and now, of course. And as you may have noticed, the show now live. And Bill, who's had some real experience with these alternative voting systems, tells us that the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now, although he would like to, I suppose, have voted, perhaps there's another choice between being live now and not being live now that he might have preferred, and we'll never know unless we allow him to vote those options. But the show is at the moment live, and today, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, invites special guest Aaron Hamlin, see, right, he knows, to talk about the hottest trends in voting. All of it at the end, you get an I listened sticker. That's the treat you need to stay tuned for. True and good call, by which I mean great idea, but actually false. I have not prepared those stickers. I can't lie to you about that. But Bill has a comment about this, actually, saying the frustrating thing is that ranked choice voting only applies to federal races in Maine, not state ones. Oh, is that right? So our idiot mini Trump governor wasn't affected by it. I thought that was the methodology by which you had finally dispatched him. But I guess that was good old-fashioned get the F out of our state offices, you're an idiot voting, which is, that much we understand. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. I didn't realize that was the case, but okay. So slow progress there, man, on that front. Let's see. Today is, in addition to being, I guess we're like contractually obligated to say that today is Eastern Orthodox Earth Day, which it isn't, but it's later than regular Earth Day. And what it is, though, I noticed via Twitter this morning, is the 1-year anniversary of the idiotic Donald Trump press conference in which he eventually gets around to asking people to explore the possibility of, sticking light bulbs up their asses or injecting bleach directly into their lungs. That's sort of the I can see Russia from my house version of what happened at this press conference. But basically, this was the one at the, in the early stages of the pandemic, in which we're looking to the President of the United States to come out and say, this is very scary, it's difficult to deal with, but, we're on it. I'm the president. We're doing our best. We're working towards treatments and vaccines, and it's going to be a while before we have a vaccine, but in the meantime, stay safe, wash your hands, wear your mask, keep distance, stay home if you can. All of that stuff. And instead, he's saying, I heard light can actually kill the virus because you go outside and there's light there. And if you go there, and if you could either just turn yourself inside out or find some way of sticking light into your body inside, or very strong lights that'll go all the way through your body and make you translucent. And then disinfectants, I understand they kill the virus. You remember all of this stuff. And it was all captured by, one, by the cameras, and two, via Twitter, thanks to Aaron Rupar, whose job it is to turn what the cameras capture into tweet threads, I guess, and has done so admirably for many a year now. I have tagged his April 23rd, 2020 thread on that, and I'll share it with you. And these are all the most absurd moments of a thoroughly absurd and, frankly, dangerous to everyone on the planet press conference way back when. Trump, I'll give you his written description of things here. Trump begins the April 23rd press briefing by claiming that he's spoken with unnamed, quote, numerous world leaders over the past 2 days, and they're saying we are leading the way in coronavirus response. The U.S., and remember, this is April last year, the U.S. has the most cases and the most deaths. Still true, a year and a president later, I guess. We can add that. And I guess at some point, it really has already happened. The Republicans have already begun saying, why millions of people are getting sick on Biden's watch. Of course, hundreds of millions are getting vaccinated on Biden's watch, but, they're spinning things the best they can and coming up with their own version of reality, just like they did here at this press conference. This thing was the wackiest thing, and wacky is a terrible word for it because it was effing dangerous. The world is on fire, and he had no interest in figuring out how to make things work. Meanwhile, as I said, a year later, we still have the most cases and the most deaths. India, as you know, has been on fire with the virus in the last 2 weeks or so. Things have really spiked there, and now that they're getting to this, now that they're in the stage where they are overwhelming their medical resources, things are only getting worse. Basically, all the things that we predicted as a possibility here in the United States, in which we saw in the earliest days of the pandemic in the Northeast, in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area in particular. But this happening nationwide, and happening nationwide in a nation of nearly 1.4 billion people. And yet, only probably today will we get to the point where India reaches, in terms of its reported infections, half of the reported infections in the United States. Now, along the way, we learned that a lot of experts figured that there were considerably more people in the United States actually infected, just simply either not getting tested or avoiding testing, whatever. And some estimates had it at 100 million people infected in the United States. But the 32.6, nearly, I guess we'll get to 32.7 million today, confirmed by testing, is still just over twice the number of confirmed cases in India. I imagine that they'll eventually rocket past that because we're vaccinating people. And, well, I don't know whether they're not or they're doing it at a much slower pace. They certainly have many, many more people to vaccinate, and it's probably harder to reach them, and who knows what difficulties are ahead of them in terms of the logistics of distributing vaccine, not to mention the fact that the leading and most effective vaccines that we've got, I mean, on Earth, I guess, are the ones we are making the most use of here, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. And, well, I guess all of them are protected by patent. And I have seen lots of people lobbying or discussing via social media, Twitter in particular, because that's where I look, that we need to, well, I guess there's some executive action that we could take to do something about setting these patents aside and allowing generic manufacture of these more effective vaccines and pumping them into India for our own good, just so that we don't get to a point where, in a population like India, again, 1.4 billion people there all alone, the possibility of developing, I guess, you would guess that the possibility of their developing a variant that is more resistant to the effects of the vaccine seems possible. Although, so far, the mRNA vaccines, at least that they've been able to check out, have been extraordinarily effective against most of the variants, and I would have to guess that comes from the way that the vaccine was manufactured with the mRNA and the ability to teach the body to combat coronaviruses in general, I guess, because if I understand correctly, this is developing antibodies that attack the spike proteins that are, one, the chief defining characteristic of coronaviruses, is what gives them their names, and two, the way a coronavirus attacks cells and enters into the cells and reproduces and produces the illness. But if you are training the body to attack anything with those protein spikes, it appears you would think that you'd be well positioned against any coronavirus, which I guess would include the common cold too. Is that not correct? That I wish Greg were here today, but I thought we learned at the outset that that this was not a new type of virus, just a new strain of coronavirus, and that coronaviruses had been with us for a long time, and were in fact responsible for the common cold. And we've had lots of byproducts of having people washing their hands, sanitizing surfaces, keeping distant, covering their faces with face masks, etc. Lots of I mean, a huge dip in the toll of the normally expected flu season, and I imagine cold season as well. So anyway, so far so good against variants of the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, with this mRNA vaccine, and we'll see whether that holds up. Let's see, Bill also chiming in on the crazy Trump press conference anniversary. We should get back to that. The bleach and UV light press conference was so wacky, and again using that word, it made people forget that a month earlier people were drinking fish tank water. That's true because, quoting the BBC, they had seen a televised briefing in which Mr. Trump discussed the potential benefits of chloroquine. This is true. I never forget the fish tank because fish tanks are themselves so wacky sounding. But yes, that was a bit of a fad at the time, that they got the idea that hydroxychloroquine was an effective treatment against COVID-19, and that some variant of what might otherwise be available in human form for or in form that's ingestible by humans, hydroxychloroquine, a treatment for various types of malaria, I guess, was some sort of ingredient in a treatment for fish tanks that cut down on whatever disease it was that aquarium fish were getting. And people were just taking the fish version of this. Just as we've found out recently, people are taking horse medications. Thanks to Dr. Ed circulating the idea that stealing your medicine out of your horse's medicine chest, if they've got one, and taking that will save you somehow. One of a series of ridiculous suggestions that Trump picked up on and would publicize in press conferences. It was crazy. You all remember that, of course. And we're probably not even done with that yet. Anyway, Aaron Rupar's, I could call this up on the show computer and play some of the excerpts. Maybe some of the crazier excerpts would make sense to remind people of just how far gone this guy was. And he was president of the United States, for God's sake. And things he was saying. All right, so let's see. There's the idea that numerous world leaders were calling him and saying, you're doing great. We can't wait to emulate you. It was ridiculous. Trump claims, and again, remember, this is last year at this time, Trump claims we're, quote, very close to a vaccine, and I guess we kind of almost were, but quickly walks it back. And then Aaron notes parenthetically here, we're likely still at least a year away. And we came in a little earlier than that, and that was great. But, all right, whatever. DHS official William Bryan then quoted as saying, our most striking observation to date is the powerful effect solar light appears to have on killing the virus on both surfaces and in the air. We see a similar effect with both temperature and humidity. Increasing them is unfavorable for the virus. That was, I think, what led Trump at that point, I don't know whether it was at that press conference, but to later say, you'll see it'll be like a miracle. As soon as the weather warms up, it'll go away. I don't feel like doing the Trump voice right now, but maybe with some of the more ridiculous quotes later on, we'll give it a shot. But you remember that. The warm weather will make it go away. And then we found out, actually, none of this. This was early stages. I mean, they could be forgiven for making some of these mistakes. Well, it's certainly possible that sunlight had an effect on killing the virus on surfaces. But now, of course, we know that really having the viruses on surfaces was really hardly ever a danger at all. In the air, yes, that's something. But of course, they were thinking droplets at the time and not aerosols. And I would say, I feel like what we've learned about the virus being airborne and carried in aerosols wasn't so much consistent with the idea that sunlight killed it as it was that being outside was effective in preventing the spread because of the air circulation. Although certainly I'm sure the sunlight, helped to neutralize what live virus might be in the aerosolized, exhalations of people who were infected. But, having a breeze disperse the virus rather than concentrating it in stagnant indoor air was, I think, what we've learned, what was really making the difference between transmission rates inside and outside. Then some actual, helpful stuff comes up, a slide that summarized some of the coronavirus research findings that William Bryan was highlighting, just basically telling everybody that heat and humidity suppress COVID-19 indoors and outdoors. I don't really know whether we still stick by the idea of heat and humidity indoors and outdoors. And of course, once when Trump said that warmer weather would make it magically disappear, he probably didn't know at the time that, warm weather in the South gets really warm and it drives people back inside where the air conditioners are on. And although the air conditioners help circulate the air, if you're staying at home or inside large spaces that are not ventilated, though they may be air cooled, thanks to the air conditioning, there's still going to be spread indoors. And in fact, that's what happened. Trump goes on, though, in the same stupid press conference to say, how long is this clip? This is about a minute. Can you get away with running this one? I mean, I think this one might be where most people remember things just really going off the rails with him. Let's see. Can I turn off?
Some of you are thinking of, if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light, and I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
Now he's turning to Deborah Birx here, who of course does nothing about this. And while it's true that I guess you can, light, is absorbed by the skin, and I guess powerful enough light, you could say, might penetrate the skin entirely and, I don't know, subject internal surfaces to some, I guess it is radiation, but not the kind that you're thinking of. But, there's really no other way for light to get in there other than opening up the body or sticking things inside it, which really isn't any part of the anybody's idea about treatment. But, what can you do? The guy has no understanding of medical issues whatsoever and is stupid enough to pretend that he is. This was one of the worst moments in American governmental history, quite honestly, and no policy was implemented in this. No policy mistakes were made. It was just the worst in terms of pure embarrassment for the United States government before the world. I guess that's the way I would put it. There's a little bit more in this clip. What else does he say in this?
Right, folks who could. Right, and then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
That's a great medical terminology, by the way. It does a tremendous number on the lungs. What a number! What a number! I mean, that's interesting. Is that New York colloquial expression? I mean, everyone kind of knows what it means, and maybe it'd be driven by are including it in television movies because they all get produced inside that bubble. But it does a number on. I don't know. Anyway, what does that mean? If you're trying to teach people English as a foreign language, idiomatically, it's a bad thing, or it's a big production, like a production number, a Broadway show. We did the number, and I don't even know where that comes from exactly, but it gets in the lungs. It does a tremendous number on the lungs. So is there any way? You remember that Trump defenders here maintained for all this time that he didn't say that we should be injecting bleach into your lungs. He just was saying, I've seen the disinfectant that knocks it out in a minute. Is there some way that we can do that, where the disease is inside the body? Because it gets into the lungs. And okay, he never puts two and two together. But if he says the disinfectants can knock it out in a minute, and the disease is inside your body and it's in the lungs, and can't we do something about this? What's the conclusion supposed to be? All right, well, we'll roll the rest
That
of
you're going to have to use medical doctors with, but it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
The light doesn't kill it in 1 minute, of course. It was disinfectant that you were talking about. What can you do? The guy is a complete moron, and just so today is the anniversary of his revealing that he was a complete moron. And what can I tell you? This stuck with us, and I think that was the moment that we knew that we were never going to get out from underneath this pandemic so long as Donald Trump was president. Even when they finally developed vaccines that were effective against the virus and kept people out of the hospital and kept people from becoming seriously ill and dying, he still couldn't get it to anybody. He was literally just packing it up in boxes and saying, put, from President Trump to North Dakota, and just put it in the mail and see what happens, and leave it up to the states to figure out how to give it out. And so that was super effective. And meanwhile, he was now wandering around the hallways of Pervalago saying, why don't I get more credit for developing the vaccines? And even that he didn't do. He threw money at the problem, and I guess we should be glad he did. The one thing that you can possibly come close to crediting him for was the idea of saying, well, what if we just paid every possible vaccine producer as much money as they wanted and said, try every angle of approach that you can, and one of these vaccines will work. And we'll waste money on some that don't work, but at least we're more likely to get one that does. That actually sort of happened. So, I don't know. Would a non-billionaire do it? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Scott Anderson has texted me during the break saying that according to Google, it gives me the definition, the slang definition of doing a number on someone, which he says his quick Google found to treat someone badly, typically by deceiving, humiliating, or criticizing them in a calculated and thorough way. And that's kind of, that's what it's come to be understood as. I guess I was just looking for the origin. So I Googled a little bit too. We were just doing it on the fly. So that gave me a good start, and I knew where you were looking so I could poke around a little further. But the origin that I find most quickly, if not necessarily being the most persuasive, but this sounds plausible. What's the origin of, somebody saying that they did a number on you? The origin of the saying, according to, what am I looking at? Wiktionary. Not Wikipedia, but Wiktionary. Similar? I don't know. Anyway, the origin of the saying, do a number on someone, dates back to the late 19th century, when Trump was young, as boxing was growing in popularity. And you recall that Trump is something of a boxing aficionado. He loved going to high-profile boxing matches as the guest of, what's his name? The promoter. What's his last? I only remember. His name was Don, too. Wasn't it Don? I'm blanking. Anyway, very flashy boxing promoter and smart in the same way as Donald Trump, I guess you would say. Smart. Like, he knew that having high-profile celebrities as guests at his boxing matches made them hot tickets, and he could sell more tickets and more pay-per-views, etc. Anyway, Trump, I don't think he had the athletic chops to be a boxer or anything, but he used to he played along with the big stereotype. I'm a big, famous, rich guy, and I'm going to dress up in a tuxedo to go to a boxing match because of some, outlandish, stupid, dated, stereotype about boxing matches, and I'm gonna come with arm candy. I'm gonna bring all the most beautiful girls that are gonna want to go to the boxing match and sit next to me, giant idiot watching this, but in the front row where the celebrities are, and that would be the attractive part. Anyway, so the popularity of boxing apparently responsible for doing a number on. The saying refers to, allegedly, how different types of punches were assigned different numbers. I've never heard any such thing. Announcers would say this when a fighter was dominating his opponent. It is now used in a more general sense. It did a number on it. But, of course, the way to win a boxing match would be to be doing several numbers on someone's face or body, but he really did a number on him. What a time saver for boxing commentators who found it too long and cumbersome to say, oh my God, he just punched him in the face and then he collapsed. I don't know. He did oh my God, and here's Johnson with a 6 and an 8 and a 4, as opposed to a right hook and a jab and followed by he wound up he swung his fist around like a clock and then reverse directions and punched him, cartoon style. Okay, I'll take it. I thought it was maybe came from doing a number on stage. Let's all do a big giant dance number, like a big production. And that it somehow got warped into this other thing. But I don't know. I've never heard anything about numbers for punches. They count the number of punches, but I've never heard anybody saying, what a great 4 that was. Or maybe the numbers were irrational numbers. I don't know. Maybe this was, what a wonderful square root of -2 that was on that seems a little complicated, though. But anyway, the point is Donald Trump is a moron, and he cost us, the world, millions of lives, and not only who are dead now, but who will probably be stuck with the long-term effects of COVID for many years to come, thanks to his ignorance and foolishness and, I don't know what, self-centeredness and ego, that he felt like he was the only one that was going to be able to do anything about that. In fact, I saw Greg tweeting around today, too. Remember that this is Dr. Birx not only not saying, no, you can't put a light bulb anywhere in your body and fix anything, and you can't inject bleach, but later on explaining, I think it was probably a few days after this, right, that he goes on the trip to the CDC headquarters, and she praises him as having, he's got such fantastic understanding of medical science. We don't know where it comes from. He's just got this inherent expertise. She's playing to his ego, and it's the worst person you could possibly have done that for. And that, I think, was the end of any respect that Greg ever had for Dr. Birx. I think if we have that correct. It was a couple days after this, I think about just shy of a week after this press conference, by the way. I mean, I would say that a lot of us looking back would have said this is the height of early pandemic panic for people like us who understand, something more about what we were up against, that it was clear that the president wasn't even on the same planet as the scientists, and we might never get out of this thing so long as he was president. At the same time, a week later, Jared Kushner, who lives on the same idiot planet as Donald Trump, had declared the United States response, the Trump administration response to the pandemic, a, quote, great success story. Now, mind you, at the time, 60,000 people had died from this great success story. And, people were going to die from this pandemic. There's a certain level at which there was nothing any president, no matter how competent, could have done to stop that. Perhaps. But, of course, we did see other countries that had, a different situation, like in New Zealand, where you're isolated and remote, it's one thing to cut yourself off from international travel. It's another thing for the United States to do it. Not just because we're not an island nation, but because we're the center of a lot more travel and commerce, and there are a lot more ways in and out of the country than there are in New Zealand. But certainly there was something that a competent president could have done to tamp down on the numbers, and this president wasn't going to do it. Now, knowing that and seeing that happen, and knowing that he was manipulating the market for personal protective equipment that was key to the response and to keeping numbers down, for Jared Kushner to declare it a great success story was an absurdity. Now, a year later, of course, we are approaching 10 times the number dead just in the United States that Kushner declared not only was a great success story, but the implication was that that was the end of the pandemic. And that was certainly the time at which the Trump administration really washed their hands of, this may be the only times that they washed their hands properly during the pandemic, they washed their hands of the pandemic or responsibility for it. Of course, Trump did famously say directly in response to a question, "I don't take any responsibility for this," which was also an incredible thing. And I guess what I'm getting at here is I'm back to my old theme. Someday, somewhere in a historical assessment of what happened here, people are going to wonder aloud, how did Donald Trump survive this crisis politically or actually physically? Survive this crisis, not just because eventually he did get the virus and it nearly killed him, but that took several months. But I was thinking not so much of dying from the virus as being killed by a mob. I really thought around this time, and then after his survival was the second time that this really occurred to me, when he survived the virus by injecting himself with experimental treatments that he stockpiled at the White House for his personal use, and then saved himself, I guess, between that and the trip to Walter Reed, and they are injecting him with everything they had under the sun. No light, no bleach, no hydroxychloroquine, by the way. When push came to shove for saving Donald Trump's life, they only used real stuff. And he managed to survive the virus, and then, of course, I've said it a million times, he went out on the White House lawn, videotaping himself, promising the same for every vulnerable senior in America and probably every other vulnerable person in America. And then he does his stupid number, the song and dance number, about, "I don't know if you think I'm a senior citizen. I don't know if you know that. Haha, just kidding. It's time for lightheartedness and joking because I almost died from coronavirus." You're still dying from coronavirus, but don't worry, I'll save you. Oh, there's an election in a month? Wow, it didn't even occur to me how unethical it would be to promise the same treatment that the President of the United States got that saved his life from coronavirus will now save you, and you can reward me for saving you with a vote at the ballot box in just a month. And in fact, some of you may already be able to vote and vote early. Right now, I suggest you head right out to the ballot box and vote for me, the guy who saved you with free Regeneron, Remdesivir, what have you, various therapies that did appear to be effective at the time if you happen to catch somebody at the exact stage of the disease where it is, in fact, effective. But the implication was that everybody was going to get this medicine and we were all going to be saved. The truth was, of course, no one was going to get that medicine, though we might eventually be saved by a vaccine that could at least make it so that most of the people who got the vaccine wouldn't end up in the hospital from this disease, and that's a pretty good thing. But to cold-heartedly, calculatedly get out there and with the White House as a backdrop and say, looking into the camera as President of the United States, "I'm going to save you with this miracle drug." And even if he was wrong about it, if he was wrong about the effectiveness of the drug but had sent it to everybody, that would be something. But he didn't. He walked away. He played golf. He literally said, "I'm going to just play golf," and plot to steal the election, which was also a big problem, culminating in the January 6th insurrection, of course. But then he said, "It's more important to me to get to my golf club and play and relax and get outside and not have the virus, now that I've conquered it, than it is for me to help anyone get this thing. And it's true, they've pointed out that there are stockpiles of the drug around certain places around the country, and doctors, if you happen to hit them at the right time with the infection, will give it to you. But the clear implication of that video was everyone was going to get that. All the seniors in America were going to get their own supply of this drug. And I brought it up a couple of days ago, and people said, I don't remember this idea of him stockpiling it at the White House. This was something that I think I found in the reporting that came out of the New York Times, I think this year, like February, early, mid-February. I can't recall exactly. But I do have the article around, and they sort of mention it in passing. And it wasn't that he, hoarded the drug and kept it off the market for his own use, but it was a mentioned in passing that, well, first of all, we found out that it wasn't at Walter Reed that he first started getting injected with this. And again, I don't know whether Regeneron is the name of the company. Was remdesivir the name of their treatment, or is that a separate thing from the Regeneron treatment? But I think both were these monoclonal therapies. But he was injected with it at the White House before he ever went to Walter Reed. He was seeking, this was the article about him seeking to avoid going to Walter Reed at all, and his aides finally saying, you're getting worse and worse. If you wait any longer, when you get sick enough to have to go to Walter Reed, you're going to have to be carried out, and everybody's going to see that. But if you go now, which is what you should be doing, you can walk under your own power and pretend you're walking very powerfully under your own power, very strongly considering putting one foot in front of the other and going to this whirly flight thing with the blades on it, go round and round, and then going for a ride in the air. And you can at least do it under your own power. And that's what he did. But he had been injected even before he got there. I'm imagining, by the way, what happens. The doctor's charged with essentially saving the president's life. He's now infected with coronavirus, and he shows up, and, they're trying to get a quick understanding of where he stands medically. And he's like, yeah, I've been injecting, I guess he wasn't injecting himself, but Ronnie Jackson's been injecting me with I don't know what at the White House. Stuff we had around. And part of the story there in that article was also about the efforts that staffers at the White House, Kushner and Kushner-affiliated people made in scrambling around, calling the various pharmaceutical companies and saying, get us some of this medication. We want it for the president, and getting it. But they got extra, essentially. And the explanation at the time was, well, in case there's any difficulties in administering it, something goes wrong, you should have extra. But they mentioned in passing, anyway, in the story that, okay, they didn't need the extra. Nothing went wrong with the administration of it, but that they're storing it in a refrigerator at the White House. That's the stockpile. It wasn't that he was hoarding the nation's supply of it. It was that, while saying a couple days later, I'm going to give it to everybody, he already had it, and there was extras, and there's no indication in February even, this is after he's left office, of what happened to that stockpile. Was it left there in case Joe Biden was stricken with coronavirus? Did he take it with him? Is it in a refrigerator at Mar-a-Lago? What happened to it? I don't know. But we learn more every day about what was secretly going on behind the scenes. And so essentially the situation was that while promising this to the rest of America, he was secretly keeping it and taking it. And also there was some indication in this February piece. I'll have to dig it up. I think it's in my pocket archives. And I found it again recently when I went looking for it, just to remind myself what happened. But the implication was that he felt so euphoric from the high that was produced by this and the steroidal treatments that he was administered at Walter Reed, that he demanded to continue with these treatments for some days after he returned, and perhaps for some days after it might have been medically effective. He just enjoyed the feeling. And there was some worry at the time, you may recall, that, the president might really be under the influence of drugs that might be inducing a euphoric state and who knows what sort of hallucinatory effects. And he's president of the United States and refusing to hand over authority while he might be, medically incapacitated. A very dangerous situation. But yeah, now the anniversary of that crazy press conference and nearly the anniversary of Jared Kushner declaring the whole thing pretty much over and done with, and that all deaths after the 60,000 were not their fault. They had done what they needed to do. They stopped coordinating. They stopped having meetings about getting PPE to people. We gave a bunch of masks to a couple of hospitals. We're done. And that's that. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And again, I really believe that a future historical inquiry will be, I don't understand. In any other time, in any other place, maybe this is what we now mean by American exceptionalism. Any other place, the guy is Ceausescu'd to death. He's physically torn from the palace and executed for having murdered 500,000 Americans for no good reason, all corrupt and idiotic, and getting out in front of the thing. He could have survived. He did survive the whole thing, but I guess in this other scenario, he might have survived it by just not going in front of the cameras and saying, you might be able to shove a light bulb up your ass or inject bleach into your lungs. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, here's a doctor who's going to say I'm a medical genius. Like the worst Banana Republic performance you ever saw. Okay, I don't know how to follow that up. There are other stories, current and political, and eventually we have to make like the transition in the second half of the second hour to the very serious discussion of alternative voting methods. But in the meantime, I felt we needed to have a rant about that, and so we did. Here's something I didn't expect to land on, because I said Banana Republic. I'm now reminded of a very bizarre story. And I opened up the computer and got things set up for the show. Open up Pocket to try to see what I have stored away. It has suggestions for, hey, you might want to read this story. And usually they're completely wrong. But once in a while, there's a weird one that makes me open it up. Bananas and Banana Republics. Honest to God, I found this in Pocket. It's in Atlas Obscura, which I think we've gone to a couple times before for probably the same purpose, and probably only read these things on Friday. When New Yorkers were menaced by banana peels. This, I think, goes to the same line of inquiry we had earlier about what does it mean to, what's the origin of doing a number on somebody? What's the origin of the idea in cartoons and early comedy shorts that if you put a banana peel on the ground, someone A, would definitely step on it, and B, they would fall in a way that produced a very specific type of sound effect that made with a slide whistle before they then hit the ground with a resounding thud that it too had its own weird sound effect in the Hanna-Barbera days. But banana peels, do you really fall down when you step on them? Apparently you do, and there's historical reason for believing this, as you might guess would be the case. It couldn't possibly just be the invention of the cartoon people, right? This is true. In 1907, the article begins, Anna H. Sterla boarded a ferry, slipped on a banana peel, and demanded $250 in compensation from the boat's operators. This isn't the origin of it. It's just sort of setting the scene. 3 doctors had examined her, she claimed, and told her she needed an operation. She received $150, a significant sum at the time, although less than the $500 she received after her first banana peel incident, a fall on the train station steps, which sounds serious, at 125th Street and Park Avenue. Not 6 months went by after that, a New York Times reporter wrote, before Mrs. Sterla was once more in trouble with these arch foes of hers banana peels. In total, Anna Sterla received $2,950 from 17 accidents in 4 years. In 11 cases, Sterla blamed banana peels. When the Times wrote about her, Sterla was on trial for making fraudulent complaints, the Donald Trump of her time. But for years, she was taken seriously, and she wasn't the driver of all this. It's just sort of interesting. After all, many New Yorkers suffered similar injuries. Slipping on a banana peel is a cliche, a vintage vaudeville gag, but its origins weren't just slapstick comedy. Before it became a comedy trope, you might have imagined. Banana peels menaced New Yorkers for decades, which is probably something you didn't imagine. Somebody must have slipped on a banana peel. It's funny because it's true, right? When bananas first arrived in New York City, it was a triumph of logistics and planning. How about that? After the Civil War, writes Dan Koppel in, this is a real book, everybody, Banana, the Fate of the Fruit That Changed the World. I'm going to have to read that alongside my book on salt. See how the fruit changed the world. I imagine it's a lot about banana republics and our domination of Central and South America and essentially destroying their future in exchange for cheap bananas. Anyway, bananas in the U.S. were like caviar, which is to say expensive and costly and difficult to get. It explains it in here, which is, I guess, how we would come by the notion of we should invade entire countries so that they will cultivate this stuff. Because money can be made. That's how all of this stuff happens. Anyway, they were expensive and hard to find status symbols. After all, sailing the tropical fruit from the nearest banana-producing area, Jamaica, could take 3 weeks by schooner. Had to do everything by schooner back then, which was longer than the banana's shelf life. But once an entrepreneur realized that leaving bananas on deck kept them cool and unspoiled, it sparked a banana bonanza. Soon, networks of factories were providing ice to cool bananas in transit, and the fruit became a ubiquitous and cheap snack stateside. So the genius of the entrepreneurialism here was investing lots and lots of money in ice factories to turn the expensive caviar into cheap street snack. I don't really know how the dynamics of that worked, but I think we can all imagine it. Anyway, this all came at a cost. What was that cost? Now, here's the interesting thing. Vendors selling bananas touted bananas' skins, the fact that they come wrapped in their own skin, as sanitary wrappers, right? If you're selling apples on the street, healthful snack, but presumably these things have to be washed before you eat them. Not the case with bananas. So, makes a great street food. Sure enough, New Yorkers discarded the wrappers onto the street, and the pages of turn-of-the-century New York City newspapers contained accounts of shockingly serious banana-related injuries. A wealthy merchant, aged 75, slipped on a banana peel in front of his home and broke his right leg near the hip. Yow. The Times reported in 1884, he is not expected to recover. That's a serious injury at any time, but in 1884, well, you could die. He did, I guess. More than 30 years later, an article headlined, Banana Peel Causes Death, described how a factory worker slipped and fell into the street where a truck hit him. Of course, truck caused death there, but, you know, journalisms. Anyway, a lone banana peel on a sidewalk, its yellow color, practically a hazard sign, doesn't seem very threatening, but in the late 19th century, trash in New York City piled up ankle or even knee deep. Ugh. The city did have a Department of Street Cleaning created in 1881, but this was the era of, unfortunately, corrupt Tammany Hall politics, where jobs were handed out on the basis of party loyalty, often to absentee workers who misused funds. Accounts and photos from the time are stunning. New Yorkers threw their trash in the street, where no one picked it up, leading the city to release wild pigs to eat the refuse. Right, there's your 30 to 50 wild pigs in your yard. You need an AR-15, and they hadn't even invented them yet. Dead animals lingered in gutters for days. In this environment, discarded banana peels rotted into slippery messes and mottled into a camouflaging brown. Now, orange peels and potato skins caused slips and falls too, but pedestrians feared bananas, which scientists have since confirmed rank among the slipperiest of fruits. I don't think we really needed to do that, but letters to the editor demanded harsh penalties for discarding the peels. You would be barred from voting these days. Perhaps Theodore Roosevelt, then New York City's chief of police, declared war on banana peels and gave a public address to his captains and sergeants on the bad habits of the banana skin, dwelling particularly on its tendency to toss people into the air, right, and bring them down with terrific force on the hard pavement. Okay. Now we've done the cartoon thing. New Yorkers were not alone in fearing bananas. St. Louis took up the issue and banned the public disposal of peels. And accounts of death by discarded banana even came from Panama, a country intimately familiar with the fruit. But the scale was entirely different in New York City. There's a whole thing here. In other American cities, the garbage men did their jobs and cleared trash and banana peels from the streets. Yet, according to Robin Nagel, anthropologist in residence for New York City's Department of Sanitation, did you know they had one? In an interview with Collectors Weekly, did you know there was one? New Yorkers persisted in being infamously, disgustingly dirty. I think people still believe that. It's likely this confluence, New York City's corruption and its status as an entertainment capital, that led to movie stars and comics performing so many banana peel gags. A weary Charlie Chaplin griped the only way to get a laugh was to have a character step over a banana peel and directly into a manhole, which I guess he successfully accomplished. In the 1890s, a police corruption scandal incited by a minister who hired a private detective to show him the city's illegal brothels, bars, and gambling venues, doing research, you see, as well as the policemen enjoying them. This all exposed Tammany Hall corruption and swept a reformist mayor into office. The new mayor, in turn, appointed the man who would rescue New Yorkers from banana peels. It was George Waring was his name. Interesting, right? Shall we summarize just a little bit more before we take our break? Waring was a Civil War colonel whose redesign of sewers in Memphis, Tennessee, ended an era of local epidemics. No surprise. As commissioner of street cleaning, he rooted out corruption and instilled military discipline. He found the street cleaning force a rabble and left it an army, the Times wrote. He insisted his men wear white uniforms, to the dismay of their wives, in order to associate them with health. There's more, believe it or not. All right, good morning. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, I spent a minute coughing and gulping at the water. See if it makes any difference. Also, thank you to Monica for reminding me that it was Don King was the boxing promoter we were looking for. Remember, another Donald, flashy idiot with ridiculous hair. And then I was just blanking on the name. But I got it now, thanks to Monica. So, all right. So we left off, actually, honest to God, discussing the banana peels and George Waring coming in and reforming the sanitation department in New York City and making a real difference here. So again, he insisted that his men wear white uniforms in order to associate them with health, ordered them to march down the streets, and prioritized cleaning poor neighborhoods. What an amazing reform that is. I mean, imagine, it's hard to believe that back in the day that there would be someone so reform-minded and actually pay attention to taking care of the poor neighborhoods, because it made sense from a sanitary perspective to start there, as opposed to ignoring it because they weren't prominent citizens who would pay into election campaign funds or whatever. Anyway, the other interesting thing about it was they were not met with open arms. In the really poor corners of the city, like 5 Points, which may be familiar to you from perhaps you saw Gangs of New York, not a neighborhood that has survived intact. No real reason to have preserved it, I don't think. But anyway, and I guess there's an area, I guess they must still call the same location 5 Points. It's just the points no longer exist. I guess it was the meeting of the streets. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, it doesn't exist in the form it existed in the movie, Gangs of New York, but I make frequent enough reference to them. Anyway, in those poor corners, to see anyone from the local government come into the neighborhood was not good news for local residents. We still have that problem in a different format, I guess. But anyway, this was explained by our resident historian, right, or anthropologist at the sanitation department. They threw bricks at the street cleaners and came out to fight them with sticks. But Waring sent them out again, and eventually they won hearts and minds in the tenements by transforming New York's streets. Soon enough, the trash men had pride of place in city parades, and the mayor gave them manly and helpful talks, interesting, on the importance of their work. A corrupt department that once pocketed taxpayer money had become an exemplar of government service. As trash and peels disappeared from city streets, banana slips lived on only in films and slapstick comedy. Now, decades later, people are puzzled by banana peel gags and question whether it's even possible to slip on one. Our puzzlement, though, is a testament to the success of people such as Waring and his men, who cleaned the streets of New York and saved us from the scourge of banana peels. Who even knew? I thought that's a hell of a Friday story. I don't think you'll be hearing it in any other political podcasts, but I could be wrong. All right. Got some other things to share with you. This actually seemed interesting as a possibility. I don't know whether I'm really going to read through the whole thing. It looks like it might be a much longer read than we want to spend time on, but perhaps a good weekend read for you in light of the discussion we'd been having about, one, the pandemic, and two, the evolution of our understanding of how to prevent the disease's spread, and I guess three, the sanitation discussion we just had. The Washington Post put up a story, it came to my attention yesterday, but it's actually from April 14th, how one restaurant's experiment may help diners breathe safely. A restaurant in California's Big Sur tries a comprehensive approach to clean its air. I've been very interested in air circulation issues and what you can do to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 indoors, given the way we've designed most of our buildings these days, and in particular one building for the reopening of for which I am partially responsible in my side occupation outside of the radio show. But I've been thinking about that, and they apparently have done some interesting experimentation in altering airflow inside their restaurant. When California's Monterey County allowed restaurants to reopen in March, indoor dining returned to the cliff-perched Sierra Mar, known for its spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean. The Big Sur restaurant now featured some new pandemic touches: 18 tabletop mini purifiers, air purifiers, 10 precisely distributed HEPA air purifiers, an upgraded heating and air conditioning system, and 4 sensors measuring the air quality in real time. It's just sort of an interesting collection of mitigation efforts, and I was wondering, since I'm dealing with a building that has no windows that open, I can't do ventilation, I've been asking all sorts of questions about what can we do with the way we do circulate air in there through the HVAC system, and should we be placing air purifiers in the rooms in order to help things out. And I guess with a comprehensive enough approach, you will at least get a write-up in the Washington Post. But that's something I'm going to try. Maybe I'll throw this open to those of you listening. Again, I'm responsible for helping planning the reopening of a building, and it's the temple. It's my own place of worship. So many of you might be in the same position with wherever you're going, either for religious services or any other gathering. You might be on the board of or on a committee to reopen these spaces, and our place has got one. It's one of these places. It's in an office park, and it's got no windows that open, and you can't keep the doors open for security reasons, because here in our fantastic modern America, our modern post-Trump America, and it happened to a degree before Trump, but it got worse during the Trump administration. Jewish houses of worship, keeping the doors open for air circulation, not a great safety idea. They come in and murder you. It's a big concern everywhere. Happens in churches too, of course, infamously, in some of the worst mass shootings and bombing attacks that we've ever experienced in this country. But You get the idea. So how do you clean up the air? And I've been looking at the air purifiers. The question I'd throw open to those of you out there, there are now 1.5 million brands of air purifiers on the market. There always have been, but the pandemic has increased things. Are there trusted brands that you have had good experience with in rooms of various sizes? Maybe you have air purifiers at home. We've always had them, for years, decades, prior to the pandemic, chiefly because the company that my wife works for has sold them. And so we would get them at a highly discounted rate, or sometimes even get vendor samples. Anyway, seems like a good idea. I thought I might distribute them around the place, particularly in the office spaces where people might spend time when we return to use of the facilities. And just sort of curious about what experience any of you may have had with different manufacturers, either lemons to stay away from or highly effective things. And they come in a variety of price ranges and with various features. And at some level, I think they're ripping you off once you're paying thousands of dollars for some of these units. But some of the lower priced units seem to be okay. We sent our son off to college with one from Blue Air, nice little unit that cleaned up a tiny little dorm room pretty well. He had a pretty good experience with that. Every doctor's and dentist's office that I've been in since then has gotten air purifiers of various types. And every time I go in and see one, I take a picture with the camera on the phone and go research it. And I think when it comes to doctors and dentists' office, there's a specialty trade. They essentially appear to sell them things that are vastly overpriced because doctors can produce that kind of cash from their practices and deduct the costs of it, and they tend to overbuy, I think, and they want things that work with some sort of medical precision or look like they work with medical precision, and I don't know whether they really do. So anyway, just wondering whether any of you have any experience with that you might be willing to share, either for consumption on the air or privately. Let me know. Just sort of curious about that. And let's see, there are a number of other things that are probably more relevant to things in which you are more interested. Let me, I'll go over here to another piece that I've had for a couple of days here, just to, I guess, explore the theme. Oh, well, I guess the time has come and gone for my ability to read this thing from the Financial Times. I wonder if, there's no way to get through this. But they did a piece a couple of days ago, which I guess I should have found some way of screen capturing and reading later. But they were offering it for free at the time, on remdesivir, the rise and fall of a COVID wonder drug. If you were ever wondering what happened to that and why we stopped talking about it, though it appeared to have proven effective in treating people who had come down with the disease, at least in early stages, why did it rise and fall like the other various less realistic treatments, let's say, floated by Donald Trump in the past? But I am caught by surprise that article no longer available to us. So too bad. I can't justify a subscription to Financial Times just to get a hold of that thing. But maybe if you have one, you can share it instead, and we can pass it on from there. Let's see. Other stories, though, plenty of them in order to fill our time here. Lots of other options. I happened to see a very interesting story circulated just a few minutes ago on Twitter by Radley Balco, who follows this topic quite closely, and commenting that it was an amazing story from The Nation. Police arrested this cop watch activist, but then recorded themselves by accident. How interesting. Given, of course, that his whole activity, for which they were arresting him, was to record the police, and they were seeking to prevent him from doing so, and accidentally recorded themselves anyway. The activist, Jose LaSalle, used a set of apps to record the police and has shared those recordings with The Nation. This written up by George Joseph. Earlier Oh, I'm sorry. This is considerably earlier. This is April 3rd, 2017. I wonder what Radley Balco is doing circulating this now. It must be part of it's part of setting the context for our post-Floyd verdict understanding of where we now stand vis-a-vis the police in this country. Last August, and this again would be August of 2016, I guess. Jose LaSalle, a prominent New York City cop watch activist, was arrested after filming a stop and frisk near a housing project in the South Bronx. Though filming the police is legal, we remind you once again, LaSalle was charged with, quote, obstructing governmental administration. LaSalle claims he was standing far away from the incident. To continue documenting his own arrest, the veteran activist left his 2 phones and a GoPro camera turned on and recording as he was being taken to a nearby police station. LaSalle spent the night in jail and was released the next day after the Bronx District Attorney's Office declined to charge him. LaSalle immediately went to pick up his stuff, hoping one of his many recording devices had captured some evidence of illegality in his arrest. But that evening, before he could extract any information from his phones and camera, LaSalle was arrested again. He had told some friends that he had evidence on his phone regarding what he considered an illegal arrest. They had tweeted about it. 4 police officers, including the precinct's commanding officer, Jerry P. O'Sullivan, promptly walked into the diner where LaSalle was having dinner and handcuffed him, claiming that he hadn't been given a court date while in booking. They also said they wanted his phone. LaSalle was taken to a holding cell where he says an officer asked for the password to his phone. LaSalle declined to provide it. Good idea, by the way. Don't use the thumbprint activation. Apparently they can either force you to do that or find some other way around that, whereas the password is better protection against their intrusion into your phone. The activist was released after a few hours, but this time he says police would not give him back his recording devices, which they said were needed for an investigation. LaSalle checked his email and found a message from an app called Lockwatch, which he had installed on his now captive phone. Someone was trying to get into the device. Lockwatch is an Android app that alerts users when someone has wrongly entered a passcode. The app works by silently snapping a picture of the individual who has entered the wrong passcode using the front camera. It also records the incident for 20 seconds using the phone's microphone and provides a time-stamped GPS coordinates for the location in which the passcode entry attempt took place. Yow. Lockwatch reported to LaSalle that a phone passcode entry attempt had occurred at 11:01 p.m. August 6th, which LaSalle says was roughly an hour after he had been brought to the police station and handed over his phone. LaSalle provided screenshots of the alert he got from Lockwatch to the Nation. The GPS coordinates show that the phone entry attempt took place within the Bronx, New York Police Department building, Police Service Area 7, to which LaSalle had been brought. That's a useful little app. The Lockwatch alert also included a blurry photo of the individual who attempted to enter the passcode into LaSalle's phone and audio of a voice telling another, "I'm going to shut this off so it's not on." LaSalle's lawyer, Jeffrey Emden of Emden and Russell LLP, says that the police obtained a search warrant for LaSalle, for a radio LaSalle was carrying, but did not have one for his passcode-protected cell phone. This is an illegal Fourth Amendment search and seizure and a privacy rights violation, said Emden. The notification forced LaSalle to act. It showed me someone was trying to tamper with my phone, and it gave me a chance to think, how can I get this message out? Recalls LaSalle, who called the New York Police Department's Internal Affairs bureaus and lodged a complaint. He told the bureau that he had evidence of phone tampering, and he explained the app's capabilities. LaSalle says he hoped the warning would halt any off-the-books phone tampering, and it may have worked. That is pretty amazing. When LaSalle got his devices back, he claims that while the audio, picture, and video files from his GoPro camera had mysteriously disappeared, his locked phone still had the audio recordings he had captured at the time of his arrest and afterwards. When I charged it up and turned it on, I was like, holy crap, he said in a different term. The files are still there. What LaSalle found in the audio seemed to confirm that his arrest occurred under questionable circumstances. As LaSalle brought it into the precinct, Officers can be heard celebrating, yelling, "It's a party, it's a party," and "Got him." Later on the recording, LaSalle says police can be heard discussing how far from them he was standing while filming their activity. In the audio, one voice says, "He was about like 10 feet away maybe," and another responds, "It was 15, 20 feet away." The first voice responds, "Nah, didn't he come close because," and the second voice cuts in, disagreeing, "I told him to stay away. Baez told him to stay away." LaSalle says Felix Baez was one of his arresting officers. In January, the Bronx District Attorney's Office suddenly decided to drop all charges against LaSalle, but the audio undermining the original justification for his arrest will likely help LaSalle as he pushes for an investigation by New York Mayor Bill de Blasio into the NYPD Division Bronx PSA 7 that arrested him. LaSalle feels that his arrest was politically motivated because of his practice of recording the police. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't told Internal Affairs about what my phone was taking pictures of them and recording them when they tried to mess with my phone. I don't believe this is an isolated incident. I've had other cases where these allegations of phone tampering have been raised, says Emden, the lawyer. But what's unique about this is that LaSalle had an app indicating when there was an attempt on illegally accessing his phone. It would be great if everybody used this, because it is an unfortunate reality we have to deal with. The police often take shortcuts to obtain evidence they want or delete that which they feel is harmful to their rendition of the facts. NYPD apparently did not respond to the nation's request for comment at that time. That is an amazing story. Interesting app. A little bit scary, but interesting as well. Another story circulating today on the policing front, which I saw briefly on Twitter, and I guess I'll have to search around for, but good news, I guess, on this front. But and I think there's a video recording that goes along with it of an arrest being made, as I understand it, in at least one of the tweets I saw about the subject, an arrest of a, at the time, handcuffed black man on a littering charge, of all things, and being abused, being punched in the face by one of the arresting officers, which I'm sure prompted bystanders to start taking video. But apparently the video also captures the other officers there intervening, doing the right thing. What the hell are you doing? You're going to get everybody in trouble. You're going to injure this guy. Who knows what could happen? We just saw the big trial and the result in the Derek Chauvin trial. This is not the time or the place to be doing this, regardless of whether or not the outcome of that trial taught us anything. And they stepped in and they prevented an assault from going further. I mean, it already happened. And there's documentary evidence of it, and that's good. But this brings to mind what we were talking about the other day when Darwin sent us his recorded segment commenting on the situation, and a good time to bring back up his suggestion that perhaps this kind of intervention could be motivated by bringing down the responsibility of punishment, really, and responsibility for these incidents on all police officers, that if they become aware that their pensions, for instance, would be affected, if and when this detainee sues the police department and sues these officers for violating his civil rights and assaulting him, he won't have to sue. Well, for one thing, he won't have to sue all of them necessarily. But if the suggestion, remember, that Darwin made was that when judgment is rendered against these officers, that taxpayers of the city who fund the police department not be the ones who are on the hook for making these payments, but that the police pension fund should perhaps be the one responsible for making these payments. Of course, in order to do that, I guess, we'd have to change the law in order to make that a possibility, for one thing. And you may have to sue the police union and or pension fund directly in order to make them liable, and it would be a difficult thing to establish the liability. You'd need to have a statutory authorization making this possible. But that's that's a change in the law that you can certainly discuss, promote, and lobby for. And perhaps we need to do some thinking about how that might be accomplished and pursue that route. But it's a great idea. We just have to figure out how to get there. It really shouldn't be the citywide tax base that pays for this, although it makes a certain amount of sense under our current interpretation of things. These police officers are, of course, acting on behalf of whatever their jurisdiction is. In some places, municipality, in some places, county, and I guess, of course, state police as well, liable to the same sorts of abusive behavior, and it would make the state liable in the lawsuit. But to focus things a little bit more clearly and not allow abusive officers to offload responsibility for making restitution onto the jurisdiction they serve, and most officers won't have the means to make payment on a personal judgment in a civil suit anyway, so it's fairly useless to target them directly. But maybe the police union should be brought into the picture in some way. All right, well, it's a thought and something to pursue. Now, though, time for us to start thinking about our last segment, which I announced earlier on in the opening of today's show, as we get ready for Aaron Hamlin to join us. He'll be calling in, I hope everything goes well, calling in during the break so that we're able to come back from our bottom of the hour break with Aaron online and ready to go to discuss this approval voting and the difference that it can make in how we make our decisions and make the decisions about who will make the decisions about, let's say, things like a new law authorizing the holding the police pension funds liable for the misdeeds of their officers on the job, or many other things, of course, any number of other changes that might be necessary along the way. And by way of preparing for it, I have some materials that they sent along here from the Center for Election Science that might make some sense to review just briefly before we take our break, or at least to be able to point you to, so that you can review them on your own as well. As I mentioned to you, the system put into place for St. Louis's mayoral election, leading, in fact, to the election of St. Louis's first black woman mayor, Tishwara Jones, who spoke in this case to Bloomberg News about, many things, mostly, of course, about her platform and political background and what she aims to do as mayor, but some discussion of the implementation of approval voting in the way this race was run, and that may have been chiefly responsible for her being able to break out of a crowded field and be elected. And then, of course, there's also some great information here, which you'll find on the center's website, which, by the way, I might as well send you to the right place. They are electionscience.org, and one of Aaron's own articles from February explaining, and we'll have him come on instead and explain the development of not only this system, but their testing of the system during the early stages of the 2020 Democratic primary. And they ran some very interesting experiments on who were the preferred candidates, what might the result be under our current system of voting, where the pick one system of voting, what might the results have been under a ranked choice instant runoff style of voting, and what might the results have been under approval voting, and then asking some very interesting side questions, making sure, controlling for the variables in the situation. Think hard about who do you support in the primaries, and think hard about what you think about their viability as a candidate in the general election. Now, this election may have been, all elections are marked by some calculus by voters on this subject. They're always thinking about how will my chosen candidate do in the general election. But this time it was extraordinarily important, perhaps more so than in any other recent election, although I feel like we say that about every election. Anyway, I'll have him come on during this break, and we'll welcome Aaron when we get back, and he'll explain what the hell's going on with this stuff and where it came from. It just snuck up on me. I've never been familiarized with this, and this is a great chance for me and you. Coming next. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As promised, I am joined by Aaron Hamlin from the Center for Election Science. Do I have that right? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Executive Director of the Center for Election Science. And this is a brand new topic for me. I actually, in all this time, I've never run across any discussion of or description of this type of voting system. And although we've heard lots about ranked choice voting, not a lot, I guess I wouldn't say, but we've certainly heard of ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting, approval voting, not something I have run into. Is this, can you tell us about where did this come from? Is this a new invention? Have I been missing this for decades, or what's going on here? I'm curious about the background.
Well, approval voting has been studied academically since the late 70s, but it's only been brought into use with government elections recently. So the first use was in 2018 with Fargo, North Dakota. And we saw its its first use was in Fargo, North Dakota, then just recently in St. Louis in the 2021 election. So its actual use has been more recent.
Okay, but it's so academically it's been discussed. I guess I recall vaguely hearing discussions of various kinds of voting systems, discussed that way. But okay, so at least two proven field uses, Fargo and St. Louis.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Very, very interesting. And I'm just kind of curious. I mean, it feels like a simplified version of the idea of instant runoff or ranked choice voting. The only thing that ever, worried me at all about that was the thought of standing in at the voting booth saying, geez, I don't know, 4 or 5 for this person or 2 or 3 for this person, which I guess you eventually come up with a solution for it and mark it and walk away. But this seems to eliminate that problem. Who did develop this voting system? Do you know the origin?
For approval voting, Stephen Brams and Peter Fishburne were the two academics that gave it its academic grounding. But it was independently identified by a number of folks around the same time in the late 70s.
Yeah, I imagine it. I mean, it feels fairly intuitive in terms of, vote for any number of people that you like. That would seem to be like a wish list for people who are occasionally faced with a large field of candidates that they either can't pick a definite favorite or they have reason to favor more than one person. So it feels sort of intuitive. How is it, do you think, that instant runoff voting somehow, it feels like a cut in line in a way. Is that the case, or do I have that wrong? Or
yeah, I think approval voting and instant runoff voting, or often called now ranked choice voting, are quite different in fact. So approval voting is actually quite a bit simpler if you consider that.
Feels like it.
And the average number of candidates for a mayoral election in the U.S. is around 8. And thinking in practicality, with a lot of RCV elections, because of the complication with ranking, in many cases they truncate the ballot so you can only rank like 3 or 5. But even if you can keep ranking as many as you want, it can be kind of a pain to rank like 8 or more candidates. Yeah. Whereas with approval voting, it's pretty straightforward just to approve all the candidates that you like.
Seems pretty simple, and I think I'd rather deal with that in most cases than having to rank as well. But yeah, interesting though that for some reason I hadn't heard of it, but I guess now that it's been in the field, we'll hear more about it. You also ran a study of some sort that you wrote up about what the result might have been, perhaps if we were voting under such a system in the 2020 presidential primaries. Do I understand the basis of that study correctly? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that.
And that's interesting too, because in that particular work, there are a number of candidates running, and so
sure.
You can only imagine like how much of a pain it would have been to rank all of them.
Yeah,
but nonetheless, we asked people to do that anyway. But
yeah, in a way, right? But at least they wouldn't have to put a number to it. But yeah, if I had to do that, what do I do?
And that was interesting too. So what we had done there in that study, and this was the early primaries for the Democratic Party, and there what we saw was the winner didn't change so much between ranked choice voting and approval voting. It was kind of really close between Biden, Sanders, and Warren, with Buttigieg a little bit further behind them when looking at priority voting. But between ranked choice voting and approval voting, both of them at this stage in time had preferred Elizabeth Warren. But an interesting component that really distinguished ranked choice voting and approval voting in this study is that when you looked down the line, so like past the folks who are taking the lead among the pack, approval voting did an excellent job of continuing to be able to capture the support for all the other candidates, whereas ranked choice voting and plurality voting really, like, you just aren't able to see that support. I think a really clear example there is with Andrew Yang. When you look at ranked choice voting and plurality voting, and ranked choice voting under its best case scenario, so like right before Andrew Yang is eliminated under ranked choice voting, they get under 10%. Yang gets under 10% as an example, whereas under approval voting, Yang was able to get 30%, which in the election world, that's a completely different world, 30% support versus less than 10% support.
Yeah, and so in an important decision like, topping the ticket for a presidential race, with that many candidates running, it's not easy under the traditional system, which, as you mentioned, is plurality voting, or the one choice, pick one type of voting, as you described it. I think that makes sense to everybody. You get a very different picture of, this is for, in addition to running for president, shaping the future of one of the two major parties. What are the preferences of the voters really, and where are they? It's one thing to describe it by saying eventually they select Joe Biden to be their candidate, or at this early stage in November of 2019, I guess, there's a strong preference for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. But there were definitely, every one of these candidates who ran had a hook, at least in their mind, for why they were in the race. And this approval voting system gave us an opportunity, or at least this experiment, to see, who was able to resonate in some way, even if they wouldn't survive the primaries. That seems like important information for the party that we're just not able to capture with pick one voting.
Exactly, yeah. And a voting method, it has more jobs to do than just to select the right winner. In a number of cases, you can have multiple different voting methods that actually select the same winner. Here is an example of that. Approval voting and ranked choice voting, we're looking in at the same winner. But in addition to that, a voting method also has to be able to accurately capture the support of all the candidates. And like you're alluding to, like that's important because during the election cycle, it's important that we are able to hear all of the voices, and it shapes even the policies of the candidate who wins. They are influenced by what the electorate thinks about the other candidates and their ideas. So if you have a candidate who's bringing new ideas to the table and they're really resonating with people, even if that candidate doesn't win, if the voting method is able to capture their support well, and it seems like they're actually getting some serious support, that can influence the policies that actually come into play with the eventual winner, even if that a candidate with new ideas isn't the one who wins.
Yeah, well, we usually incorporate that in, I guess, political science explains it by, you co-opt essentially the best policies of those who don't make it through, and it becomes part of either the platform or sometimes a well-performing candidate that doesn't make it all the way through is then the bluntest possible instrument, making them the vice presidential candidate, choosing one from among these many. So there's some representation of that, but it's clearly something that is important strategically to the party, and there's a method that's available that would capture all of that scientifically and would take the guesswork out of it. And maybe a good idea to avail yourself of this. And does it do? I guess it would do it in a way that's more definitive than polling might otherwise be. Although I guess you conducted this experiment via polling, but.
Yeah. So like normally polling is a way to try to predict an outcome, and you take the same kind of measurement as you would see during the election itself. And if you're saying like in this world that the election would use a different voting method, like that's kind of what you're insinuating by using a different voting method to do the poll. And also here, an interesting component that we implemented here, in addition to directly comparing these different voting methods with respondents, we also asked the respondents what their honest assessment was of these candidates. So we would ask them to give an honest assessment of each of these candidates on the scale of, say, like 0 to 5. And when we superimpose those honest assessments onto these different voting methods, we see that approval voting is actually doing a really good job in terms of capturing the support. So it overlaps well, whereas when you look at the choose one voting method and ranked choice voting, particularly as you look down the line in the candidates, you see that they're really missing out and not really identifying a lot of support that these candidates have.
Yeah, and the results are very interesting. There's a graph in the write-up of this study that makes it pretty clear. And okay, so if this is timed about a year out from the election, this captures probably about where we were accurately enough in November 2019, a year out from the election. Warren, Sanders, very popular. Buttigieg, I guess at that point, really experiencing his big boom. Joe Biden in the mix in the top 4 there. But pretty much what you would expect from what we learned from regular plurality voting choice making. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Andrew Yang, Amy Klobuchar just sort of excluded from the top tier, but registering very high approval. And so it seems to capture what we need strategically from from our primary contests. But is there any chance or any discussion at all of any sort of different voting system for something as high profile as a presidential primary, or what might be next for actual use of approval voting?
So we have chapters in cities throughout the country, which if a listener right now is thinking like, oh, like this sounds really simple. And again, like approval voting is this very simple method where you just pick as many as you want and the candidate with the most votes wins. It's very easy to implement. And if someone is listening and thinking, okay, well, how can I get involved and how can I push this forward? if you go to our website under Take Action, you can join one of the many chapters that we have across the country. And that's really how we implement approval voting in the next city, by working with folks in communities and identifying other key stakeholders to help them run campaigns so that they can have approval voting in their city. And when we're talking about something like presidential primaries or presidential elections, that also, states are free to decide how they go about that. So in running a campaign statewide, we also are able to change the voting method for that state in terms of how they elect the U.S. president. So those coincide. So as we run state campaigns in the future, we'll also be affecting this as well.
Yeah, it seems like these new, or the experiments in different voting systems, I don't know, maybe the comfort level with starting with smaller scale elections, municipal elections, et cetera. It seems like the best entry point into it. But I guess, yeah, you're right. In running primary elections, even for president, we've been through this before in terms of fighting over whether or not to allow the caucus system to continue on, or choosing primary over caucus system. I guess it's the state party apparatus can make that decision. And is it just up to them if they decided, if they were persuaded by one of your local chapters or a statewide campaign that the Democratic Party of Maine might choose to run its presidential primary this way?
It can vary a bit by state in terms of like how that operates, but generally it's decided by state law in terms of how the primaries are run. Wow. So you can affect that by, say, like doing an initiative at the state level.
Is there anything that would restrict it from, say, the DNC? Do they have anything that would stand in the way of allowing a state to run an election this way?
Not unless there's some kind of constitutional issue, but here, the way that we're going about doing it and the way that others have, that doesn't seem to be a point.
Okay. Well, interesting. And anybody on the horizon that you think might be the next to implement this sort of approval voting?
We have a number of cities that we are working with. I don't want to spill anything too early, but we have a number of candidate cities as well as some potential states that we're looking at right now.
So possible for a statewide election at some point.
Yeah, we are ready to go full speed ahead. So we don't want to slow down anytime soon.
Sure. Okay. And so, yeah, again, you emphasized that if you were interested in getting involved in or learning more about it, certainly you find them at electionscience.org. And so a Take Action section will take you to the information for how you can join one of the local chapters. Interesting. All right. And as a member of a local chapter, what sort of activities are you involved in? What might you expect to do?
So there, they would be talking with Chris Rowley, our director of advocacy and campaigns, and his team. So we work with you so that you understand like what the kind of projection looks like for your future in terms of making sure that you're identifying the right people in your network to build your coalition, understanding what the skills involved are, and just being able to really take you step by step in terms of having you understand like how you get from this point where we are, like maybe just kind of thinking like, okay, like I want to get involved, to, okay, now we're running a ballot initiative. So those steps between A and Z, there's a bunch of them, but Chris and our team are really good about making sure that you're able to move along so that you're able to see the next St. Louis or Fargo.
You get there'd be support there in terms of, okay, well, I like the idea. Now what? What do I do? Who do I speak to? Who's the correct people to approach over this? So you're able to guide them through that. That's helpful, because sometimes I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are interested in exploring it, and the idea that you you could also help them out with, oh, okay, here's how you actually would go about conducting a campaign like this. Now, I also saw that you are involved recently, earlier this month in a debate that I saw a YouTube video of. Are you in this? Are you debating the comparative merits of this particular voting system versus ranked choice and instant runoff? Is that, is it a direct debate of the merits of the one versus the other?
Yeah, that's right. So this was a debate hosted by Yale, and I had debated political scientist Lee Drutman. And here, it's important that people recognize that there are other opportunities in terms of voting methods, that just because instant runoff voting is one that has been out there a bit, doesn't necessarily mean that should be the de facto reform. In fact, approval voting is much simpler to implement, much simpler to understand. In complicated elections, it can do a better job in terms of selecting the right winner. It uniformly does better in terms of capturing support, in terms of all the other candidates, including third parties, which it's important to note that in Maine, neither third party for presidential candidates were able to get more than 2% under ranked choice voting. So I know that's an area where a lot of RCV advocates push ranked choice voting because it's supposed to help third parties, but it had its opportunity there and it didn't do anything. So we debated a number of those individual points.
That is interesting. Are there other competing theories that got mentioned in the debate or that we ought to know about? Or
this one was just between instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting and approval voting. And those are the only two alternative voting methods that have been implemented for U.S. government use.
Okay. Well, yeah, that is interesting. And I know a lot of times people become interested in these alternative methods because of their interest in third parties or their frustration with the two major parties. And we see that all the time. And the knock on voting third party, of course, the idea that either the spoiler effect or that you're splitting votes and making way for an otherwise unpopular or at least not supported by the majority result. And so I guess it would make a real difference. If that's your interest, then apparently in the field tests of the use of ranked choice versus approval voting, the third parties tend to, I'll say fare better, but it doesn't distort support in any way. It doesn't seem to change the outcome or give you the wrong outcome or anything like that. It just simply measures more accurately interest, I guess, in third parties and third party candidates than ranked choice voting. So.
Correct, yeah. And as another way to illustrate that, we had done another poll in 2016 looking at the U.S. presidential election, and there Jill Stein from the Green Party went from 1% to 9% under approval voting. 1% was what she had under our Choose One method. And then Gary Johnson from the Libertarian Party had 3% under our Choose One method, whereas under approval voting had 21%. And that's still... that's obviously like a completely different world in terms of support. For instance, like public financing kicks in at once you get over 5% in the general election. So Gary, both of them would have hit that threshold, and Gary Johnson would have hit the 15% threshold, which is necessary to get in the U.S. presidential debates, which, as we often see, it's only limited to two candidates. So we see a number of spillover effects from changing the voting method in terms of being able to capture the support in this very simple way that approval voting does. Whereas with ranked choice voting, the voter, like we mentioned, how much of a pain it can be to rank a number of candidates. So it may be that the voter is not including that information. But even when the voter includes that information, if a candidate is eliminated early on, all the other support that's hidden for that candidate within candidates that are doing better is actually never captured by ranked choice voting. And that's one reason that you see this artificially low support for these third-party candidates that's not captured under that voting method. Whereas with approval voting, if you say, okay, I support this candidate, approval voting actually listens to you, and that support is reflected. And so that's obviously one quality that we care about, is making sure that when you are expressing your vote under approval voting, that the method is actually listening to you, and that's what approval voting is doing, and that's why it's being able to capture the support for all these other candidates.
Yes, and which becomes strategically important come general election time, or come time to actually govern once the election is over, to have some realistic view of where your coalition of support actually is and what else they might approve of, despite the fact that it may or may not have been incorporated into your platform. But that's part of the mechanism of retaining power, retaining the approval of your coalition. And right now, polling provides some of that information, but otherwise it's a best guess situation, I suppose, and better to have this data. One of the other things, I guess one of the knocks I've always thought of when it comes to thinking about third parties or multi-party elections in the United States, the way our system is, it's built to filter down into a split between at least two large coalitions, if nothing else, maybe largely because the decisions that get made in Congress, where you end up in at the end of most of these elections, not the presidential race, but in Congress, and the choices that they're given in their voting is really, there are two, yes or no on this measure, and it tends to break things. It seems to force people into one of two camps. Has there ever been any academic discussion even of changing voting systems inside Congress or other legislative bodies that can capture some of this information or better reflect opinions in the United States? Is that in the offing?
Well, if you're looking at being able to move beyond two parties, approval voting will help you get there. Sure. But it's still a single winner method. If you really want more than two parties, then you need a multi-winner proportional method, which there are versions of approval voting, like there are proportional versions of approval voting that will get you there as well. So like that's one direction that you can take if you say like, okay, well, we really want a multi-party system. Taking a proportional version of approval voting or another proportional voting method will help you get there. But even within the single winner framework, approval voting will give third parties and independents a platform that they would otherwise not have, which they can move forward with. Whereas under plurality voting, you're basically just like stuck at the bottom with really no way to climb up.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Actually, it makes me think of, the whole question of alternative methods of voting. For a lot of people, it's a surprise even to find out about ranked choice voting. Like, what do you mean? Another way of voting? This is so natural, but only because it's the only thing you've ever seen. And I think, once presented with approval voting as an option, I think people probably would end up thinking, you know what, actually, that's a more natural way of making my decisions. What do I like? Why don't I write this down and start thinking about it, as opposed to just choosing one? That makes some sense. And I guess it does have something of a parallel. It's a rare sight these days, in particular in Congress, that I'm thinking back to rules that I haven't seen used in the House voting for some time, but they used to have the King of the Hill or variant, the Queen of the Hill type rule, where you had several alternative versions of a bill offered for votes, and you would take a vote on all of them, and then the one that garnered the most support would be the version of the bill that moved forward. That seems kind of similar.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're seeing real world cases of approval voting. So like, for instance, in St. Louis, the previous election, not the most recent when they used approval voting, but before when they used the choose one method, you would see like this terrible vote splitting that divided the black community and progressive voices in St. Louis. And as a result of using approval voting, which is very easy to implement, we saw the two progressive voices, which in St. Louis, like that's like many major cities, that's really what the consensus is. Yeah. We saw those two voices rise to the top, whereas previously they would have had their votes split, and we would have seen some kind of artificial candidate move forward.
I see.
It really addresses that vote splitting.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, we run up against the end of our show now. I want to thank you for coming by and discussing it, too. I'll point everybody to the Bloomberg piece on Tishwara Jones, who, does she credit her election to this system, or just at least lifting her voice to the system, I suppose? And,
yeah, she does.
Yeah, well, it's all laid out pretty clearly, and they ask her about it directly in this piece. Thank you, Aaron, for coming by. I appreciate you joining us for this length of time to introduce us to approval voting, and I'll bet you'll find some fans out there. I'll point everybody to the website. Maybe you'll get some folks signing up in the Take Action section. I hope so.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon, I hope, and find out if there are more such elections in the offing. In the meantime, time for us now to hand things over to Justice after this.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, thanks again to Aaron, and we didn't discuss exactly how he would exit and all of this, but that's one of the details we leave aside for this. All right, next up, of course, Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I would tell you what he has on tap for you, but it would take about as long as it would be just to hand things off and let him run the show. See you next week.